so many clinicians, doctors, nurses, dietitians. I think that is the only way we're going to really address chronic diseases of aging, which is my area of study, because diet, physical activity are at the root of all conditions of aging. Let's see. There we go. I have no conflicts of interest to disclose. What's everybody laughing about?
There's a lot of conflicts of interest.
Oh. All right. This is what I hope you can come out of the talk today, being able to name 3 dietary components that have strong evidence for a role in the brain, name 3 distinctive foods of the MIND diet that promote brain health, and be able to describe the type of individual who may benefit from vitamin supplementation. Alzheimer's disease is actually very common, especially in those age 65 years and older. It's about 10 to 13% of the population, and it increases exponentially with older age, so that those 85 years and older are affected at about a 50% rate. And those 65 to 74, it's only 3%. So you can see the really steep increase with older age. And in the next 30 years or so, we're expecting to see about 16 million older adults with Alzheimer's disease because we're an aging population. And another interesting aspect about Alzheimer's disease is that about 99.6% of all clinical trials of drugs have failed for the disease. No other disease has a worse failure rate. This places a lot of emphasis on preventive factors for Alzheimer's disease, of which we now know quite a bit. So on this slide, we'll see that the established risk factors are older age, low education, having the apolipoprotein E4 allele, which about doubles your risk. And then there's a great deal of study and successful trials in managing cardiovascular disease risk factors like hypertension and diabetes. Obesity is another factor. Head injury, depression, and neuroticism can also increase your risk. And among the protective factors are exercise, participating in cognitive activities, participating in social activities. And then there's some research on anti-inflammatory agents as well as cholesterol and statin drugs. And then my focus today will be on dietary factors, which is some of the dietary factors can put you at increased risk and some at decreased risk. So this slide here summarizes what I'm going to go into great detail in this talk. So here we have nutrients with strong evidence and the food sources. And then this lists, the lower half of the slide are those nutrients or bioactives that have moderate or limited evidence. Now, when I say this, strong evidence, moderate evidence, this is my subjective review of the literature. To be in my category of strong evidence, there has to be animal models, which are very tightly controlled and show mechanisms of the disease that demonstrate that that nutrient or that food is important for brain health. There also has to be consistent evidence from human studies that are prospective in nature. That means that they measure the diet component at the beginning of the study when people don't have the disease, or they've assessed their cognitive abilities, and then they follow them over time to see who declines in their cognitive abilities or who gets the disease. So you have the diet firmly ahead of who gets disease. So when I show you these slides with this evidence, dietary tocopherols, or vitamin E, DHA, one of the omega-3 fatty acids, the B vitamins, and saturated fat rise to the top for having that kind of very broad, comprehensive literature backing their association with Alzheimer's, dementia, or brain health. So the saturated fat is the only one that's an increased risk. And therefore, having a diet that is composed mostly of unsaturated fats and lower in the saturated fats is associated with decreased risk of dementia. And then there's a whole host of nutrients here: carotenoids, flavonoids, vitamin D, trans fats, monounsaturated fat, polyphenols. And I would say that mostly it's limited evidence. So they've been fairly newly identified as being important to the brain, but there just hasn't been enough study among animal models and among human studies to rise to the level of strong evidence. And so as time goes by, maybe with additional studies, they will be in the top half of this slide. So let's start with the antioxidant nutrients, which I've named here as vitamin E, vitamin C, carotenoids, and polyphenols. So we conducted a study on the south side of Chicago that included more than 10,000 people aged 65 and older, called the Chicago Health and Aging Project. It was a 20-year study. We followed this population for 20 years. And I was able to, so 1993 was when we started this study, and I was able to get funding from the National Institutes on Health in 1996 to do a full comprehensive assessment of their diet. And I'll be showing you a couple of graphs that look exactly like this, so I'll spend some time taking you through it. So we have their cognitive functioning score on the y-axis. This is the highest score. And then we have their time on study on the x-axis. And this particular publication was after we had 6 years of follow-up of the population. And this was a graph showing the relation between vitamin E intake in the food, not through supplements, but from food sources only, and cognitive decline over time. So this pink line represents people in the lowest quintile of vitamin E intake. Remember, vitamin E is from vegetable oils, nuts, seeds, whole grains, and leafy greens. And then the higher the vitamin E intake, the slower the cognitive decline over time. So the fourth and fifth quintiles, the highest quintiles of intake, are the green and black lines. We also looked at the risk of developing Alzheimer's dementia. Again, this is vitamin E in foods. This line here is no association. That means the risk is the same in the higher quintiles as the lowest. What we can see here, these are quintiles of vitamin E intake on the x-axis, and it was the highest quintile of vitamin E intake. This was a median of about half of the RDA, not all that high. And this represents a 60% reduction in the risk of developing Alzheimer's disease in this population. And this is adjusted or controlled for education, race, and their time on study. But it held even when we controlled for physical activity and cardiovascular conditions. So that's just my study. I just wanted you to get a view of what I mean when consistency across many studies. So these are a large majority, not absolutely every single one, of those prospective studies. Some measured vitamin E in blood, serum plasma, others through a diet assessment. The plus sign means that they observed a protective relation, and you can see almost every single study looking at vitamin E in the diet showed association with either slower cognitive decline or lower risk of dementia. So very solid, consistent evidence. Vitamin C, not so much. Maybe a little more negative than positive signs. Beta carotene, far fewer studies, also not all that convincing. Flavonoids, just 4 studies, mostly showing positive. Now, this is the data for taking a vitamin E or other antioxidant in a vitamin supplement. What do you see? They're almost all negative. Beta carotene is the exception. Now, I've highlighted in green color the several trials that were done. So these are randomized trials where they compared a vitamin E supplement to placebo. And so the epidemiological studies, the observational studies, and the trials are in agreement that supplements don't have very good evidence at all for protecting the brain. Now, I've asterisked 2 exceptions that I want to show you some further data on. And before we get into that, I want to give you a basis for what I'm going to be talking about. So this is from a textbook on nutrition, nutritional epidemiology. It's a basic principle in the nutrition field that here we have nutrient intake or concentration of a nutrient on the x-axis, and we have physiological function on the y-axis. So this is the best physiological function that you can have, no matter what it is, what organ or overall health. And what you can see is that the larger the intake, it's not linear, the better you do. There is a broad intermediate category where you have optimum functioning. You fall below that, or you get very, very high levels, and you have less than optimum functioning. And there's even some extremes here. A nutrient at very high levels could be toxic and cause death, and very low levels could also. So this gets lost in the clinical trials that have been done, especially in the US. So this is one of those trials that was asterisked. Now, this was a large study, thousands of women, and they put them on 600 international units of alpha tocopherol versus placebo. And they followed them for almost 10 years. And their main outcome, they had this was an ancillary study to tag on cognitive testing, so they could look at the supplement effects on cognitive decline. Overall, they reported no effect. So this is just another one of those vitamin E trials that wasn't successful. They did a post hoc analysis where they went back to see what women were consuming in terms of vitamin E in their diet at the baseline. And then they looked at their results. And sure enough, those women that had 6 milligrams per day or less than 6.1 milligrams per day of vitamin E, the RDA is 15 milligrams per day, so quite a bit less. They had significant reduction in cognitive decline, whereas women above that level had no such benefit. So this is indicating that perhaps people with marginal vitamin E intake benefit from the vitamin E supplement. So clinical trials need to be designed in the US in a very different way. Right now, for those of you who have experience, maybe public health experience or done trials yourself, they're a very healthy group that ends up volunteering to be in your clinical trials. And probably they're very well nourished. So what they're doing by not paying attention to that, they're recruiting people who are likely already at that optimum level of functioning. They're already getting adequate levels of vitamin E. So when they supplement them, they're not going to show any difference. This is not likely to show any kind of difference statistically. So, and there are some trials that have been designed like this in Europe. For some reason, the US is has not one single trial that I've seen been designed to target people who are marginal or deficient, and if you supplement them, you are more likely to see a beneficial effect of the supplement. But these haven't been done, and so, I mean, maybe supplementation won't work, but right now, this hasn't been done, so we don't know. Okay, moving on to other types of tocopherols. So the trials that have been done have been focused on alpha tocopherol. However, in the US, our primary form of vitamin E is gamma tocopherol. So these are the tocopherol sources, various oils, whole grains, wheat germ, nuts, seeds, and leafy greens. So in our Chicago Health and Aging Project, we looked at the different tocopherols, the different forms, alpha, gamma, beta, delta, and then we looked at all together, the total amount of tocopherol intake. Now these are statistics, I apologize. The positive coefficient here means that there was slower cognitive decline with increasing level, but most of you will know the p-value being less than 0.05 is significant, and you can see that gamma, alpha, and total tocopherol intake were all associated with slower decline. So this means that targeting alpha is ignoring other tocopherol forms that we get in food that are probably beneficial to the brain. So at Rush, where I work, we have some phenomenal research studies going on. This one, called the Memory and Aging Project, recruits people from retirement communities. And so they're volunteers, but they have to get into the study, they have to be free of dementia, and they have to agree to donate their brains when they die, as well as annual evaluations. So it's an incredible resource that I feel so fortunate to have funding to collect diet on this population. So what we have in effect is annually I have what they're consuming in their diets, and they also, their annual evaluations are about 3 hours long. They have to be cognitively tested by 19 different cognitive tests. So it's very intensive. And so we were able to look in a different way at diet effects on the brain. So the two characteristics of Alzheimer's disease in the brain are amyloid plaques and neurofibrillary tangles. These are tangled nerve filaments within the neuron, and these are plaques that form outside the neurons and interfere with brain communication. So here we have tertiles of, this is alpha tocopherol that we measured in the brain tissue after they died. And then this is looking at linearly, the higher the amount of alpha tocopherol, what happened to the pathology. And we found that alpha, remember that's what's in the vitamin supplements in the trials? This here is the p-value. None of them are statistically significant. So in effect, alpha tocopherol that these trials were giving supplements for, that wasn't the component that was associated with decreased neuropathology in the brain. But this is gamma. We measured gamma in the brain tissue as well. And you can see that the higher the gamma, there was significantly less amyloid load in the brain. And there was also significantly less tangle severity in the brain. Okay, so here, another thing to consider are what we call neural reserve. Now, it'll be of interest to you that we have thousands of brains through these cohort studies where we've assessed them very intensely during their life, and then we look to see what's going on in their brain. And you won't believe this, but about a third of the people, when we look at their brains, a third of them will have such severe Alzheimer pathology that they would be diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease just based on the pathology, but there was absolutely no evidence of dementia during their lifetime. A third, yes. So one of the hypotheses to explain this is the hypotheses of neural reserve. And let's see if I have a cartoon. No, sorry. Can I go back? Okay. So the theory of cognitive reserve, you know that your brain is made up of all these neural connections, synaptic connections, and that's how the cells communicate, and that's how you think and form memories. The more developed that neural network, the more capability you have to think, even though there's pathology in the way. So imagine you have an amyloid plaque in the brain, and it's so that communication is blocked. If you have a big network, it just works its way around it, and your brain is still able to function. So that's the theory of neural reserve. So the presynaptic proteins then are very important. What helps to preserve that neural connection in your brain? So we looked at this in our study. Again, we measured the alpha and gamma tocopherol levels in the brain. And so these are different presynaptic proteins. Overall, we measured 9, but there's quite a few. We found that the presynaptic proteins were associated with slower cognitive decline. And then we looked at the brain levels of the tocopherols. And the upward arrow means that we found a significant association. So the total amount of tocopherols measured in your brain, the higher the level of these presynaptic proteins. And we found that alpha was somewhat more important because it was associated individually with the presynaptic proteins, but gamma wasn't. So it looks like both alpha and gamma are important. It's that they play different roles to protect the brain. So now moving on to fish and omega-3 fatty acids. These are the primary fatty acids that are omega-3. Alpha-linolenic acid, which you can get through vegetable sources. And then EPA and DHA, which you can get also directly from fish and marine organisms. But if you consume alpha-linolenic acid, a very small proportion of it will be converted, metabolized into EPA and DHA. So here are the sources: wheat germ, soybeans and walnuts, certain oils, and human milk, which was what led us to the importance of omega-3s in the brain in the first place. Our first human formulas had no omega-3s in them. And when they analyzed mother's milk and found such high levels of omega-3 fatty acids, it sent the science world on a mission to understand what role it played in infant development. And what these studies found was that 50 to 60% of the dry weight structure of the brain is lipid material. And the primary lipid is DHA. And it's highly concentrated in the most metabolically active areas of the brain. And in fact, it's really only found DHA in measurable amounts in the body in the most metabolically active areas. So that would be the brain, the retina, and the testes. So they found through these studies that DHA was very important for just the structure and function of the neurons, as well as neurotransmission and membrane fluidity, how well it could bring nutrients in and out of the neuron. So around the year 2000, with all of this scientific data showing how important omega-3s were to the developing brain, science started thinking, it's important for the developing brain. What about the older brain? And so this started a bunch of mostly animal models to begin. And they found that these were mostly rodents. When they fed DHA in their diet, the older animals, they found that they could increase the amount of DHA found in the brain. And as we age, we do lose lipid material in the brain. We do lose DHA. So this was a very exciting finding. And we also found through this body of evidence that DHA in the older brain was very important for hippocampal nerve growth, for increasing antioxidant enzymes, and also decreasing inflammation, ischemic damage to neurons, oxidative damage, and decreasing impaired learning. So the Chicago Health and Aging Project was one of the first studies to demonstrate that fish was also important in dementia. So here we have people who never consume fish. That's our referent category. And here's people who don't eat it very frequently. And then once per week, and even higher, they both had a 60% significant reduction in the risk of developing Alzheimer's disease. So one seafood meal a week seemed to be the level of benefit. Increasing it more didn't seem to give you even greater benefit. Now, again, here's a list of all the studies looking prospectively at omega-3s, either in diet. You can see some of them are diet. Others are blood levels. And here's the size of the study. These come from all over the world. The length of follow-up, some of them pretty extensive. And then you see the omega-3 fatty acid measure. The higher the levels, the lower the decline in cognitive abilities. Very few studies looked at fish consumption, and they all found that it was associated with slower cognitive decline. Now, these are the studies that looked at Alzheimer's disease. This line means no association. These are protective. As you can see, all the studies found protective relations between fish consumption and risk of developing Alzheimer's disease. So this lends to that strong evidence. And there's been some recent studies to add to this chart that are also on this side of the null value. The one study that didn't find significant association lumped in that one seafood meal a week as their referent category. So this is going to stride that level of benefit. Now here are the supplement trials. Look at here. All of them are negative. This is for these are preventive trials. There's one on mild cognitive impairment subjects. There have been 2 small trials in people with mild cognitive impairment showing some evidence of benefit. But again, going to that graph I showed you at the beginning, no trial has restricted their trial cohort to people who don't consume fish. And in fact, they allowed both the placebo and the fish oil group to consume up to 3 fish meals a week. So we still don't have a test as to whether it would be beneficial in people who have no fish intake or marginal DHA levels. Okay, now moving on to dietary fats. So we know that a high ratio of saturated to unsaturated fats, it does not give you a favorable lipid profile. There's been some models that have focused on fat composition in relation to brain, and they found that the higher the saturated fat or high cholesterol diet was associated with impaired memory, greater amounts of that amyloid deposition I told you was characteristic of Alzheimer's, more neuroinflammation, greater neurotoxicity, and increased impairment of the blood-brain barrier. So here are the prospective studies that have looked at fats, and I have saturated, trans, mono, poly, and then the ratio of unsaturated to saturated fat. The most consistent associations are increased saturated fat intake being associated with greater cognitive decline. And trans fats, as most of you know, our food supply is less and less with trans fats, with federal restrictions on that addition in our food supply. But there's also evidence that increased unsaturated fats are associated with decreased cognitive decline. Moving on to B vitamins. For the clinicians in the room, you know that there is a vitamin B12 neurological deficiency syndrome that with deficiency over time, it can result in cognitive problems, some dementia, memory problems. And so it's treated clinically. It also, low B12 can increase homocysteine, which has been related to increased risk of Alzheimer's disease. And folate, another B vitamin, vitamin B9, also deficient levels increase homocysteine. And it's very important for DNA repair, so that deficiencies in folate can decrease DNA repair. Now, it's very difficult to study this because some populations around the world, including the US, fortify the food supply with folic acid, which is the synthetic form of folate. So it's very difficult to study this and to see what effects it has on the brain. With that said, this is studies that looked for risk of developing Alzheimer's disease. And you see that it's fairly consistent that impaired or marginal to deficient levels of folate are associated with increased risk of Alzheimer's disease. What did I say? Yes. So that having higher levels of folate decreases your risk of Alzheimer's disease. Now, B12 we know is important for memory decline. It's very difficult to measure. So we know clinically it's important. I don't mean to convey through this slide that it's not important for the brain, because it is very important for the brain. So these are the trials that have looked at folic acid in relation to cognition over time in randomized trials. This study here and this one are the two trials. This is a Dutch study done in the Netherlands, and you can see it's quite large. They targeted people with low levels of folate, and then they supplemented them. This one went on for 3 years. They both found that there was a decreased cognitive decline over their observation period. So here's an example of a well-designed trial for a nutrition study. This other one, they were all normal levels, and they didn't find, ND means no difference, they didn't find a benefit. Okay, so moving on quickly to food groups. So I find this fascinating. Here are the studies that have looked at vegetables and fruits individually. And all of them showed benefit from vegetable consumption. Not one of them showed benefit from fruit consumption, which was really intriguing to me because they're so correlated, right? People who eat vegetables are likely to consume fruits. So it was very interesting to see that no matter what the study, these are all very different cohorts and around the world again that have verified these findings. Now, the exception are berries. And this literature for the brain really came out of animal models that were started at Tufts University. They did quite a few studies. I just have one of those experiments I'm showing you here. So these were all adult rats, so they're looking at aging brains. And this was the control-fed rat. And then they had a blueberry extract added to this group, a strawberry extract, and then both berries. And so any of the berry groups had improved performance over the control-fed rats. The blueberries were particularly important for learning and memory. The strawberry groups were more important for motor performance and for balance and coordination. So together, they had the combined benefits for both motor and cognition. So this is data from our Chicago Health and Aging Project. Again, our time on study, and this is the cognitive score. This is people with the lowest intake of vegetables, less than 1 a day. And you can see that the higher the level, these are the 4th and 5th quintiles, the slower their rate of cognitive decline. So this is taking a very comprehensive questionnaire with hundreds of items and summing overall vegetable intake. This is another graph to show, so the higher the orange bar, the slower the cognitive decline. And this is broken down by green leafy vegetables, yellow, cruciferous, and legumes. And our strongest association by far was for leafy greens. And this was replicated in several other studies. We looked at it again in our Memory and Aging Project, the cohort where people donated their brains. And this is leafy greens, so here are people in the lowest group quintile of leafy greens, less than 1 a day. And here's people who consumed 1 or more leafy greens a day. This was a very, very strong difference. We estimate that it's the equivalent of being 11 years younger in age. So it's very strong. I've not seen a stronger relation of any of the diet or other preventive variables that I've looked at. Okay, now moving on to diet patterns. So this is the studies that have looked at the Mediterranean diet. And you can see that they range in size from 17,000. They're really quite large. So these are the measures they looked at. These are all like number of cognitive tests. This is a basic functioning for dementia test. Here's our study. We have 19 cognitive tests. And you can see that not all of them show protection. I've highlighted in yellow those that used the real Mediterranean diet, that is the traditional Greek Mediterranean diet, as the metric for scoring their population. All these other studies that are not highlighted in yellow, they use the median for their own population. So they're all different metrics, but you can imagine a Midwestern population might be consuming on average 1 vegetable a day versus the traditional Greek diet, which is 4 or more per day. So when you use the appropriate metric, a real Mediterranean diet, it's pretty consistent, the evidence supporting the Mediterranean diet being protective for the brain. Here are some other diets, the DASH diet, the Nordic prudent diet, the westernized diet. So it's pretty spotty. The Nordic, the DASH have 1 study each showing support, or I guess there's 2 here for the DASH diet. These are in 2 of our different populations. The Western diet associated with increased risk of dementia. All right, so now there's some clinical trials of diets that have cognitive outcomes. You've probably heard of the PREDIMED study. This was a very large trial, more than 7,000 people, all in the country of Spain. So they were spread out all through Spain. And they were randomized to a Mediterranean diet, plus they were given out olive oil, or the Mediterranean diet where they were supplemented with nuts. And their control group was a low-fat diet. And they followed them, so I believe this is really closer to 5 years on the diet. And then they had some cognitive testing at the end, and only 500 of them. And what they found was that these are the two tests they use. In both cases, the Mediterranean diet groups had significantly higher scores at the end of the trial compared to the low-fat group. Now, this is a study that looked at the DASH diet. This was a diet that was developed to control hypertension. And they had 3 groups: the DASH diet alone, DASH diet with weight management, which was basically aerobic activity 3 times a week, and then usual care was their control group. And they had pre and post measurements of 8 different cognitive tests. These are the data of their effects. So this is a memory test. And they found this was the combined physical activity and DASH diet. They had significantly higher scores at the end compared to the control diet. And then this is a test of cognitive speed. And they found that both the DASH diet alone and that combined with physical activity had significant improvements over the low-fat diet. And this is a very short trial. I think it was 3 months. 3 months long. Let's see. 4 months, yeah. Yeah, yeah. And it's a small study. There's only 124 people in the study, so take it with a grain of salt. Okay, so we were at the point, after more than 20 years of study of nutrition and development of dementia, we thought it is time we had a diet that was designed to look at diet effects on the brain. So we submitted multiple times. The first 2 times we got rejected, and I'm so glad we did, because the first time we submitted, we were using pretty much the Mediterranean diet. And after we were rejected, it occurred to me that we were ignoring all of the research that we and others had done about nutrition in the brain. So we decided with our the next submission that we were going to create a diet that was specific to slowing cognitive decline and preventing dementia. So we took the basics of the Mediterranean and DASH diets. So this is the DASH diet. This is the traditional Greek diet. We took the basic components, and I've lined them up so you can see, the same categories here in the rows. And for each one of the basic components of these 2 very healthy, proven diets, we considered the literature on nutrition in the brain. So I'll show you, and then modified it. So I'll show you some examples. So both the DASH and the Mediterranean diet have 4 or more servings of vegetables a day. But as I showed you, the level of benefit was really 2 vegetables a day, and one of those vegetables, being a leafy green, was particularly protective. So instead of having the recommended diet be 4 or more vegetables servings a day, we took it to 2, one of which should be a leafy green. So that's one modification. Fruits is another modification. So both diets have 3 to 4 or more servings of fruits a day. But as I showed you in the previous slide, none of the studies show that fruits as a general category were important for the brain. But berries were. So instead of having a recommendation for fruits, we specify to consume berries 2 to 5 times per week. Now, this doesn't mean we say don't eat fruits, other fruits. It's just that we don't have a recommendation for it. So if you like to consume fruits or consume them for some other disease, that's fine. It's just that we're not highlighting it for the brain. So those are some key differences. One other one maybe I should show you is fish. So the traditional Greek diet was 6 or more servings of fish per week. And if you will remember, we saw the level of benefit at 1 seafood meal a week. So we made that modification to the MIND diet. So we had to test this before we asked a lot of money from the National Institutes on Health to fund us for this trial. So we looked at it in our Memory and Aging Project, or MAP, and we had 994 people who we measured diet at the baseline, and they lived long enough to have at least 2 cognitive assessments. And the mean follow-up time was almost 5 years, but some people went up to 10 years of follow-up. During that time, 114 developed Alzheimer's disease. So this is what we found. We scored individuals according to the MIND diet, so there were 15 components. These are people in the lowest tertile of scores. They had the fastest rate of cognitive decline. Those in the mid-moderate score level had a significant reduction in cognitive decline, and those in the top group had the biggest reduction in cognitive decline. And I believe this was the equivalent of 7.5 years younger in age. So then we compared our MIND diet score to the performance of the Mediterranean diet score or the DASH. We just took the same diet questionnaire and rescored according to those other 2 diets. And these statistics show that the MIND diet had almost double the impact on cognitive decline than either of the other 2 diets. And then we looked at the risk of developing Alzheimer's disease. And the MIND diet is in the top row here. We found a 35% reduction in the middle tertile of scores of developing AD, and a 53% reduction in development of AD in those with the highest scores. Neither the DASH or the Mediterranean group having intermediate scores were significantly associated with less risk. The Mediterranean diet had a similar reduction for the highest scores. But this just showed us that we were making a diet that was highly sensitive to the important foods to protect the brain. So we finally got funding for the MIND trial in 2016. The trial is designed to test the effects of a 3-year intervention of the MIND diet on cognitive decline. And we're also, as secondary outcomes, looking at the effects on brain changes, on MRI changes, structural changes in the brain. And then we're measuring all sorts of other cardiovascular disease conditions and biochemical markers, including those for inflammation and oxidative stress. There's 3 centers. Rush is the primary center, but the Harvard School of Public Health, where the DASH diet was, Frank Sachs is leading the clinical portion at Harvard, and he was one of the originators of the DASH diet. And then we have a data coordinating center, that's what DCC stands for, at the Brigham and at Harvard. And then we have some research laboratories and then an imaging laboratory. It's funded by the National Institute on Aging, and we have generous donations from High Bush Blueberry Commission, the Inaliva Olive Oil, and Peanut and Tree Nut Institutes, where they give free food items for our participants on the MIND diet. So we are a 3-year intervention. So you receive either the MIND diet or usual diet. Both groups get a mild weight loss component, only 250 calories restricted per day. So it's very mild. Let's see, 65 to 84 years of age. They don't have cognitive impairment. They have to be overweight and have a suboptimal diet at the beginning of the trial so that we have something to improve. And that was actually our biggest reason that why someone wasn't recruited into the trial. 56% had adequate diets, and so we couldn't let them into the trial. So I covered this already. I'm conscious of time here. So I think maybe just I'll end with this. So we do this all through counseling, and dietitians in the room know how extraordinarily difficult it is to get people to change their diets. Our dietitians are on weekly, well now they're bi-weekly, but for the first year of the trial, every week they were in contact or had group sessions with individuals. We have very high follow-up. 95% are still following up. Less than 1% have dropped out of the trial. Okay, now I don't have a website. Everybody asked me for a website. We do this on purpose because we don't want our control group to go up on the website and then start taking the diet, right? But my daughter and I developed we're writing a book that you can get on Amazon or some other. So the first part of the book is everything that I just told you in this lecture. And then the second part of the book are 80 of her recipes that follow the MIND diet. Thank you very much.